So welcome back to our weekend debate, and we did so many different things in here, and we've got a great panel here who's going to obviously be feisty. Thanks. And go. Well, I'm not calling you. I'm not calling you. You've got something horrible about us yet. The review on this, I can't wait to see. By the way, I thought we'd talk to Daph on this one because you got your second private members bill going through. This is the one about the chief minister, isn't it? About getting rid of somebody, but yes. You keep saying very diplomatically, nothing to do with you, Mr. Quayle.
It's not about the current administration. Really must emphasise that point.
Oh, what a shame.
The point about the private members bill is to change a single clause of the Council of Ministers Act that it was the previous administration, I think it was Alf Cannon's private members bill just before the last election, and we endorsed it in this administration, but only after the Chief Minister had been elected. So curiously, the Chief Minister was elected with 12 members of the House of Keys and all of the Legislative Council members. Then when we approved the previous amendment to the Council of Ministers Bill, we changed it that only the House of Keys could elect the Chief Minister, and that would require a straight majority of 13 votes. But the part to remove a chief minister from office, so a vote of no confidence in the Council of Ministers, if it was brought, would require still, it used to be a whole majority of Tynwald at 17 votes, it was changed to 16, so a 2/3 majority of the House of Keys, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, would a chief minister be tenable though if a majority of the Keys voted?
Well, I would say not.
Impeach him.
Well, if it was 13, 14 or 15 votes, then to my mind, it's a broken administration. That Chief Minister has no credibility whatsoever and should step down. But technically, if all the Council of Ministers vote in support of the Council of Ministers, they can remain in office and the backbenchers can do nothing about it other than vote everything down that they bring forward. But that, I can't imagine, would be a situation that we would get into. So I just feel it's
So
when's
your bill going forward?
We're going second reading on Tuesday.
And was everyone for it?
There was unanimous support to enable me to have the bill drawn up, leave to introduce it, but that doesn't mean there's unanimous
That's like
support
cheese
for
in a
this.
mousetrap.
There's a lot.
Turkey's Christmas, I think.
There's a lot of discussion whether it should be 13 or 14 or more. And to my mind, if it's straight majority to elect a chief minister who puts together the government, then it should be a straight majority to.
Have you had support in principle from anybody in Coman or Coman unanimously?
No.
Nobody in Coman.
I asked Howard Quayle whether he would second the bill, and he didn't get back to me. But he was one of the ones in the original time when it was. I think it was Mr. Speaker.
I sent to Howard.
Mr. Speaker was bidding to do the same amendment when it originally came forward, and I make it 8 current members of the House of Keys voted against it then, and only one of those has indicated to me that he's changed his opinion, and that's Mr. Robert Shaw. So it'll be interesting when we have the debate.
And people might say, why really do you need to do this? I mean, it's never going to come up, is it? Because if Chief Minister loses the Council of Ministers, that would be it anyway, wouldn't it? Presumably. But they'd have a little moment in there.
Either a Chief Minister stands down, which is what Mr. Corkill did, Richard Corkill.
Yes.
But I think he was aware that there would be a large amount of people voting against him. Other ministers, individual ministers, have had votes of no confidence put. Most of them were not seconded or not taken forward. And there's only one that I could find, which was in a certain health minister in the last administration, where it was seconded, debated, but motion lost.
It would have to be something serious, wouldn't it?
It wouldn't be frivolous. It wouldn't be frivolous. No. It would be something significant that if a chief minister had not stepped down as a result, that it should be in the hands of the democratically elected chamber to remove.
But as it stands, Coman can remove a chief minister, can they? I mean, did they ever vote in Coman to decide, right, you no longer are boss?
No, it's
it has to go back to House Keys. There's no funny. Yep, fine. So you do feel a need for this to have your.
I think it makes sense to equalise the number. That it's, to my mind, it is untenable for a chief minister to continue if he doesn't command the majority of the House of Keys.
I'm surprised the chief minister doesn't support you.
Well, he may well. I hope he will.
If he's arguing against that, he's arguing that a simple majority could vote to remove him from office, and he'd carry on. I mean, that's sending a curious message indeed.
Well, we'll see what happens on Tuesday.
Yeah, but I'll tell you this. I mean, I don't know what you thinking of standing for the Keys again, but going into an election year.
Oscar, she's here. Come on. Get a column out of it.
That's your job.
Are you standing here?
You've already asked.
I know,
me.
and you said yes.
I still have things I want to achieve, and at this moment, I don't know why I wouldn't be standing.
She's considering her position.
Carry on.
Anyway, going into an election year, things like constitutional reform will be like watching paint dry. I mean, what people out there really want to know about at the moment is why over the best part of 5 years we've still got homelessness and food poverty and stuff like that. I mean, people are really cheesed off about this. Now, you can take that as my rantings on Facebook, but generally, when I put something down, I get a good feedback to it, an excellent feedback.
Homelessness
I'm talking thousands.
and food banks and that, but homelessness, you don't see people. I mean, in Jersey, I've seen them camping out in the parks, but I don't see that level of homelessness here.
Doesn't exist.
It's more hidden. It's more
And
sober
also,
surfing.
we know there's homelessness because thanks to COVID, they removed all the homeless people and offered, and I think it was about 22 people were then put up in a hotel. And because of issues that surround that isn't always suitable for everybody who was accommodated. But that's, I agree actually, in terms of going forward, equality of people generally, of income and the with the climate change aspects.
There's more inequality with this administration and this parliament than there's been for a long time. I mean, you've got to go back to the mid-'80s when I was first involved in the union to have seen a period like this before. And I'd seen it even earlier in the 60s when there was a lot of unemployment here and people had to go away to work. You know, that's not an option now. But it's not just the number of people who physically haven't got a bed to sleep in tonight. It's young people who are wanting to take a step on the housing ladder, or those that need to get into social housing. There's not, in my view, been a big enough programme on social housing, and there wasn't enough innovation, although Chris Robertshaw, give him his due, and I don't usually give him his due, Chris Robertshaw, around about a decade ago, did identify problems with the private housing sector on the island and tried to do something about it. And there was no stomach in Tynwald at that time. We'll see whether Baker manages to do any better. I mean, I won't hold my breath, but there you go.
You don't think the first-time buyer scheme and those sort of schemes... I mean, I personally, I've no idea how I'm ever going to be able to afford to buy a property because it's just...
Well, there were innovative schemes in the 90s. They brought forward built houses that for first-time buyers that were cheaper, and you got grants towards and support for, and then you know, if you sold them back in too quick a time, you had to pay some of the profit back and so on.
Yeah.
But there was a balanced programme. I mean, a guy who would probably give you a lot of information on this is Dominic Delaney, because Dominic was very outspoken about it at the time, and it did a lot. But, you know, we see history repeating itself. We saw the problems through the late 80s, which generated the, anger about housing problems and other social issues. And I'm afraid we're seeing that now, 30 years later.
I think I'm not too versed. With social housing, is it every 5 years it's means tested? I think I'm right in saying.
It is now. They're reviewed, they're reassessed.
Every 5 years.
And that's causing some issues. I completely agree. And I think that there's sometimes the thresholds are actually set too high so that people who are struggling, and I've had a particular case which I still find wrong, but obviously it doesn't quite tick the boxes of where it goes. So a young family in a property in a commissioner's house, they are having their rent put up, £70 a week increase that they can't meet because they've got 2 children in childcare. So their childcare costs are £1,500 a month, and their rent's gone up because that isn't counted. That isn't an expense that figures in the assessment of the income of that family to pay the commissioner's rent.
Politicians have never wanted to tread into the area of social housing or council housing. It's a big vote issue with a lot of constituencies.
They do.
They do. The numbers are actually falling for the number of people on waiting lists for social housing, but it's still with multiple housing authorities.
I'm talking about the general issues surrounding it here.
You've got
people in social housing who are paying too much relative to their incomes, and there are people in social housing who could pay more relative to their incomes. Now, nobody's been prepared to tackle that as an issue at all. And if you like, you end up with the situation you're talking about, where a family or one person perhaps in a house gets exactly the same increase landed on them after there's an argy-bargy over whether they're going to be increased at all, and I doubt whether they should have been increased this year, to be perfectly honest.
Do you think it's fair that what you're saying about the government here hasn't done enough about it?
I think that it hasn't had a focus for I would say this year, but then COVID will be the main issue that's come forward. There's also Brexit going on, so the picture of the world, how it's going to be next year, is going to be very
Howard was on top
different.
of Brexit. He was, before COVID broke out, he was running up and down to London all the time. I thought he was running the negotiations.
Just to cap what sort of Bernard was saying, you know, you are right to an extent.
Oh, thank you.
Not just
No interviews with you, Borat.
Don't be intimidated. Keep going.
Don't worry about it. No, you're right when you say we are seeing these economic issues. People are really struggling on the Isle of Man, but also there are still societal issues that we don't see as much. So in the late 80s, you know, you had the whole gay rights issue. You had lots of other deprivation and poverty that was going on. A lot of really deep hitting societal issues. But we're still seeing some of these issues still crop up today. Like, for instance, in the sexual offences obscene publications bill going through Tynwald at the moment, there's now a section in that act that deals with conversion therapy, so like gay conversion therapy. And the Ireland's one of the first places in the world to criminalise that as a practice. Something that the UK government is still trying. Well, it was under Theresa May. For instance, this is one issue, you know, they try to get banned and it still isn't. So there are still some societal issues that are bubbling away, very, very small in the background. But
the difference in the 80s and early 90s, and I'm not being disparaging to you or anybody else. We got off our backsides and did something about it, to be blunt. There was a civil liberties movement at the time. There was a very vibrant trade union movement. I know because I was right in the middle of it. The reason I got involved was the first union meeting full union meeting I went to in the 80s was so bursting with life. I thought, this is great stuff. I can't get enough of this. And, you know, I got another almost 30 years of it. But there doesn't seem to be that degree of organisation, and so the unions are totally quiet and sidelined. I think it's shameful, by the way, that this administration, more so than any previous, has sidelined the union movement totally.
You think they've been sidelined?
Yeah, they've been sidelined completely.
Education, they've been quite vociferous, and also the inequality is actually coming out in the social need of people. And one of my big bugbears, as you may know, is over disadvantaged children, particularly where resources are not equally divided. We don't have pupil premium supporting additional support for the most socially disadvantaged. When COVID happened, some children couldn't access the education because they didn't have the devices or the Wi-Fi. So that is all supposed to have been addressed now, in that those people who don't have the access to the devices would be provided with it going forward. And I know there were some exceptional teachers who reached out or delivered work to certain homes of children who couldn't access it other ways. But that demonstrated to me the huge social divides that we do have, that it's not seen by a lot of people, and it's the fault of government that's been allowed to happen.
Give me an example of sidelining. Come on, example. You say the union's been sidelined.
The education unions have been very effective.
They're effective, yeah. So
absolutely, settlement.
I had a pretty, shall we say, tense relationship with chief ministers over the years. But one of the things I can say, going right back to the first administration, and I supported the ministerial system, by the way. There's a lot of people on the island who still don't think it's a good thing after 30 years, but I supported it when it was brought in. The union movement always had access to Walker, then Gelling, and on afterwards. I doubt whether they've got access now to Howard Quayle. Even the media haven't got access to them on the terms that they want.
Well, we haven't got a weekly interview now.
That's not a fault of Howard Quayle, by the way. That's a fault of us as a society allowing that to occur. That certain interest groups, like the Chamber of Commerce, you got me on my hobby.
You love them, don't you? You love them.
The Chamber of Commerce have got a disproportionate influence. Now, I don't say they shouldn't have an influence. They had an influence back in the days when I was going to the Manx National Economic Development Council. But there was a certain degree of fairness an equilibrium that is not there now. And I'm afraid that's manifest across society as well. And, you can rebut me if you like, but I bet you couldn't ring up tomorrow and say, right, I want to go and talk to Howard about some of these issues that have occurred in this review or the review last week or whatever. You wouldn't get in there. Well, and now he's going to have Dolan to guard him. Good God, a mastiff.
Do you take any of that on board? What you saying?
I'm interested. I mean, I come from a journalist at the time when trade unions were incredibly active, and I've interviewed Bernard many times. And I would think that the Isle of Man has lost something if it doesn't have that input, because I think that social issues, there is a glossing over. There is a sense that we're all doing all right, thank you. And I think a lack of awareness about those who struggle. And I think that the poverty, the unseen poverty on the island, they're just about managing who aren't really. The bid that there was to reduce the working parents allowance at one point, although that seems to have gone away again, and the angst and stress that caused to people who received it, and then if their child turns a year, that they suddenly have to work another 8 hours, 16 hours a week, if they could even find the job to do that. People are living day to day, every pound really matters, and the big issue we get, and also knowing from speaking with the food bank, the increase holiday hunger. It's not just about holiday hunger through the summer holidays. It's about the inability to afford school uniform and all the PE kit and equipment that goes with that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a phrase, isn't there, sweeping it under the carpet. And I think to an extent, a lot of issues here are done that. I think a lot of the issues to do with like drug abuse and users and victims of that. And a lot of it's swept under the carpet, and it's like, the Isle of Man's this pristine place, and there's nothing wrong with it. And there are issues. People are, seriously hungry.
Well, there's a lot of goodwill in the community as well. I mean,
absolutely.
When push comes to shove, people will respond, to things like appeals over homelessness, the food bank, or whatever.
Absolutely.
But it shouldn't have to be that way. I mean, I'm not saying, there's not goodwill in the community, that it's still a community, which is not what you could say about a number of countries in the world. And by the way, because ministers in particular and some politicians take it really seriously, if you criticise them, it doesn't mean they're the worst in the world or you don't like them. I mean, we've only got to cast our eye to the UK and look at what's running that country, or cast our eye to the United States before we start saying Howard Quayle's bad or Alan Bell before him was bad or whatever. But people should be prepared to take criticism, and you're quite right. I remember you coming into my office and I didn't like some of the articles you wrote about me afterwards, but that's what the media is there for. It's not there to make union officials feel comfortable, or the Chamber of Commerce or politicians. It's there to probe and get answers. In the same way as members should be able to, and the keys, I come back to that.
Yes,
I'm looking forward to you and what's his name doing a better job as speaker and making sure that you folk get answers in future.
Well, he was putting his foot down last week, saying, Mr. Thomas, if you heckle the Chief Minister, you'll be removed from the chamber. So,
Mr. Thomas was on one that day, and he's joining us soon on this panel, because I'm dying to get his take on it. He's getting very vocal now, isn't he?
He's born again.
What, since leaving the Council of Ministers, suddenly, you mean?
Well, you could be cynical, but he will argue he didn't leave the Council of Ministers.
He was fired. But he shouldn't have been
You
fired.
will argue that he engineered his departure, but he says he didn't do that at all.
No.
I always believe Chris. Honest Chris.
Right. And how do you feel that the House is these days? I mean, you come to the last year now.
I'm finding this last year a little bit unusual, and I don't know if it's because electioneering has started or the jostling for position.
Has it started?
Or
Of course it
profile.
started.
It's a very different feeling from previous years. So much for consensus government, and obviously without a party system, there has to be a certain amount of consensus. And yes, Howard Quayle and this administration have done an exceptional job keeping the island in the position it is now, safe from COVID. But suddenly we started getting a different message. At one point it was flatten the curve, and then now it's an elimination policy. But how is that possible, and how does that impact economic benefit, mental well-being and travel in the future? So in the chamber,
I
it
don't think I
feels
like
different.
the idea of Howard and elimination policy. Some puns come to
Do you
mind.
like Sir Howard, the sound of that? Because this is just running all the time that he's out. Not he's out. That sounds terrible. He might get a knighthood out of this or
Well,
something.
it leaves me cold, the whole
UK honours list.
honours thing. But if anybody's going to get a knighthood, it should be Terry Kringle.
Yeah.
You know, why aren't the media nominating him for something? You know, Terry, excellent.
Well, we can talk about the media.
Venerable.
60 years.
We'll talk about the media in the last section because I know.
But coming back to Sir Howard, I don't see why Howard shouldn't get a knighthood if the people of the Isle of Man want him to have one.
I wouldn't believe I'd heard that coming out of your mouth.
I personally don't support the honour system. People here seem to love the thing, and why shouldn't he? Miles Walker got one. Most of the rest of the chief ministers were given one award or another. I was a bit surprised that David Ashford became an MBE suddenly out of the woods. But he sort of looks the part because he's been wearing that starched shirt for
Let me
ages.
just get this. If you don't like it, but if you were offered one, you know, one of those gongs from the United Kingdom government, what would you do? Would you be one of those people that say, "Oh no, handing it back," or would you? "Oh, thank you very much."
What you're trying to imply is that I would be like Daffodilus Thomas MP, who, when he was offered a seat in the Lords, became Lord Ellis Thomas. Yeah. That's an interesting thing.
You have got an answer. You mean you might take it?
I'm hoping
amazed.
that Daphne will put me forward for the Tynwald medal before then, and that'll save me the embarrassment.
You are a national institution, and on that note, we'll leave part 2. Join us some more.
Cheeky